Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Onyx Path Twitch. I have the honor and pleasure of being joined today by Ferne Milton. Fern is one of the authors who's worked on Monster Kingdoms. Monster Kingdoms is our current crowdfunder. We are currently funded. We are, um, I believe, last time I looked, we were over double the funding goal, which is great. We have a couple of stretch goals that we've already unlocked, and I think we're in progress to, or may have already unlocked the jumpstart stretch goal. It looks like we have a little bit of ways to go for the jumpstart. So, if you've not yet popped in and lent your support to Monster Kingdoms, by all means, please hit that link I just dropped in the chat and lend your support. If you back, you get access to the manuscript. You get, back only updates. A lot of fun stuff going on right there. So I definitely highly recommend checking it out. I am backing it as well. I've mentioned this a couple times publicly, but it's one of the few Onyx Path games that, for whatever, just timing or whatnot, I don't actually have a lot of personal knowledge about. So I get to engage with it as a fan, which is very cool, very nice. So we're going to dive into some questions. If you're watching in the chat and you have any questions that you'd like to ask, go ahead and just type question in all caps before the question. You can also use the Chips of Onyx channel currency to highlight your question. Makes it easier for me to spot. Um, but yeah, let's dive into it. Fern, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you here. If you could please just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, your pronouns, how you got into the glorious and lavish world of tabletop role playing game creation.
Yeah, cool. So, yeah, thank you so much for having me on as well. So I'm Ferne Milton, she, her. I am one half of Cobblepath Games. We are a small two-person indie studio. We were brought on to do the bestiary for Monster Kingdoms, but we have done our own games in the past. We have three published games with a bunch of supplements for some of them. We have Locus, which is a personal psychological horror game inspired by things like Silent Hill and a lot of Asian horror, and Event Horizon is a big inspiration for it as well. Then we have two comedy games, Stacks of Goblins, where everyone plays a different goblin in the stack, and you're going to the people places to steal some things and constantly changing places. And we have Coffee and Chaos, which is a kind of holiday session game where you bring your characters in from other role-playing games and play them as they fail miserably to run a cafe for the day. And that one's printed on a menu and has a table talker for all the card flips, and is you use cutlery to play it
Oh, that's
as well as a
beautiful.
deck of cards.
That sounds a lot of
Um,
fun.
yeah, it's we had a lot of fun play testing that one.
I bet.
A lot of fun. And so, in terms of how I got into tabletop games, well, so I like games. I've been doing game stuff for a long time. I actually cut my teeth playing old White Wolf games, and New WOD were like my first major kind of tabletop experiences were playing those, usually homebrews, but uh, playing a variety of the kind of like the New WOD core and with some of the other bits thrown in. Um, and I ended up being a teacher of both game design and game art for 5 years
Oh, cool.
in the UK. And during that was when we published Locus and we kickstarted it. And then um, I decided to step away from teaching, and I was going to have a month off before I started looking for jobs as like a graphic designer or doing artwork or something. And then the pandemic hit properly halfway through that month, and it sort of became a thing of like, oh, I'm not getting a career change anymore, am I?
Yeah.
Because everyone was being laid off. So I just kind of went hard at the Locust Kickstarter, which was running at the time, or we were about to launch it. So I kind of went into let's do social media, let's make this a thing. And since then, I've kind of been doing this full time, producing stuff and working on things. I do a bit of consultancy, though it's not that common. And this year we ended up launching our LARP.
Oh,
which
sweet.
has its second event ever coming up in October. And it will be an ongoing LARP with ongoing characters and a big story plot and lots of lore and things. It's fun. We're pretty proud of it actually, and people seem to really like playing it. So
Well, that's awesome.
um,
That's very cool.
yeah,
And that's based in the UK, correct?
yes, yeah.
That's
In the Midlands, firmly in the middle of the country in the UK.
gotcha.
That's
Cool.
where it is at the moment.
So
Um,
I saw amongst that list of games you mentioned Stacks of Goblins, and it sounds like a completely fun game, but also a nice on ramp into discussing Monster Kingdoms and your work on it.
yeah,
Um, so you were familiar before coming to Monster Kingdoms with working in a system where where monsters were the protagonists. Um, but if you could, I guess, tell us a little bit about uh, the work that you did on the Monster Kingdoms manuscript. What sections
yeah.
of the book you worked on?
So um, to start with, it's actually quite funny because we were actually brought on to Monster Kingdoms for one of our games, but it wasn't goblins, it was locusts. um, because the monsters that we had for locusts and the way they were built was obviously appreciated by
Oh,
some of the
sweet.
Onyx Path team, and they thought that we'd write a good bestiary. So myself and the other half of Cobblepath, Steph, we were brought on and we wrote the core of the bestiary chapter. A few entries have been written since after Red Lines where other writers thought there were things that needed to be in there that aren't. So it's not 100% ours, but it is like the core bulk of it is all ours. And our job was basically to write the various entries that would be in that chapter that can be used to be opposition to player characters, essentially, in the non um so Monster Kingdoms has a army and kind of like sort of commander kind of style part of it. The bestiary that we wrote was more for the kind of individual small groups of characters brawling in the kingdoms rather than the big armies fighting each other stuff, which has its own kind of like set of rules and
Sure.
realities and ways it works and things. Um, so yeah, we had loosely speaking, we were asked for 40 entries. Obviously, that's not quite the number that came out. I think there's more than 40 now. And in the end, what we ended up doing, we decided that we were going to produce a few, 2 to 3 for every kingdom, and then fill the rest of the numbers out with monsters that could appear anywhere.
Okay.
And I should stop saying monsters because monsters is not the appropriate term. Adversaries is the appropriate term
Right.
because everyone's a monster.
Right. Well, and that does bring in, I guess, a nice segue to my next question, which is, um, when the premise of the game, right, is that you are playing monsters. How does that impact your decisions and your approach to creating antagonists or adversaries for those monsters?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So mechanically, we had a fair amount of a mechanical input, but Monster Kingdoms is a Storypath Ultra game. So it works in the same way as the other Storypath Ultra games, which means that the kind of core way that antagonists work was already set in stone.
Right.
Um, they have the same part of the brief was also that in particular creatures from the world below um, needed to be able to be used in the Monster Kingdoms and vice versa, because they're both part of the Earthbane cycle. So mechanically, they're very kind of locked in into how they work, and the way that Storypath Ultra treats um, antagonists and adversaries in particular is that they are mechanically very different. They're presented in the game space, they exist as a different type of entity to players and often to NPCs as well.
Right.
So that kind of does leave a challenge of like, how are you going to operate with this? How are you going to build like what walls does that make for what you include?
Sure. Sure.
Um, And what we ended up settling on really was we didn't have um there aren't characters in the adversary list.
Okay.
There are monsters you could apply characters to, though they are comparatively actually quite rare in the Monster Kingdom's bestiary. I think for example, Curseborn has a fair few character monsters that are kind of like default templates that you're supposed
Right.
to map onto NPCs.
Right.
We didn't really do that because um we felt that there was enough space in the Monster Kingdoms to just have these kind of other and it kind of fits with the concept of the Monster Kingdoms as well of like everybody's othering each other. There's this whole kind of concept of dominion and subjugation is kind of like a just a present reality in the way the Monster Kingdoms operate on a day-to-day basis. So a good chunk of the bestiary list is essentially animals.
Okay.
Um, they're weird animals.
Sure.
They're not.
Right. Fantasy
We haven't
animals versus.
specced cats.
Right.
We've specced things like basilisks.
Right.
Um, and then some of the stuff is a little bit more linked to the actual kind of like civilizations and communities that exist in the Monster Kingdoms. But generally speaking, they're more representative of kind of organized groups in some way. So an example of that is the Kingdom of Brandor is very military. They've got like a strong military tradition and a very highly trained and highly equipped army.
Okay.
One of the monsters from Brandor is Brandor military,
Okay.
which is just a monster template for members of the military as generally as squads.
Okay.
And there's some sub ones of like they train pikemen, they train I think Guardians was the other one, and they train mages. So there's like different subsets for the types that they do, and that has a nice contrast in the Kirsch kingdom, who are they are kind of the orc kingdom, but they're
Okay.
not all orcs because none of the kingdoms are that demographically set.
Right. They're not like
They
there's
all
no
have
homogeny in any of the
no.
kingdom.
There are kingdoms that have like more of certain species in them, but none of them are kind of like all one. But Kirsch is the big industrial, fighty, like they're not militaristic, but they love war.
Right.
But they also like industry and they do a lot of kind of factory work. And as a result, they have equipped militias, but they're not like highly their gear isn't as high quality as say Brando's is. So they have an army because obviously they need to have like if you're going to Kirsch, there is a decent chance you're going to end in a brawl with some of their military people.
Right. That's
That's just a thing that's very likely to happen. But they've not got military, they've got raiders. And their
okay.
raiders don't have you don't have a squad of pikemen, you have a bunch of people who are pretty good at fighting because they spend most of their spare time punching other people in bars,
Right.
each of them wielding their own favorite weapon. And it kind of and then some of the powers and things they've got kind of flavor that and help it like build that as a mechanical existence to kind of contrast them with each other. But that's kind of the other half is you've got these kind of groups that are parts of the civilizations, but they're characterized by a membership of a group.
Sure.
And then you've got things that are animals, or at least are othered enough by the societies that they aren't generally members of communities.
Right. They fall
Um,
under a creature sort of headline.
yeah. Um,
And correct me if I'm wrong. Those, I guess to reframe it, do those tend to be what kind of environments do those tend to appear in? Do those tend to be a random encounter type of thing? Do those tend to be a dungeon crawl type of encounter, or is it across the board? Or how is that handled in terms of like the ecology of of the adversaries?
so it's kind of so obviously, as I mentioned, a lot of them are based per kingdom.
Mhm.
I would say that they're not. generally designed to be in dungeon crawls per se, random encounters, and in the wilds. But I would say that that's kind of partly just because of the reality of it being an Onyx Path style game where it's not got that format of going to dungeons. It's got that format of stories and just interacting with the space and possibly going to locations, but not that kind of hardcore. You will go to a building and
Right,
you will
here's the
fight
map,
through it.
and right, make sure you
Yeah,
go to room 18A. Yeah,
yes. Um,
right,
which you can absolutely do in this game, but it's like not baked into the DNA in the same way that it is in some other in the sort of more OSR tradition kind of dungeon crawly kind of stuff. But a lot of the so obviously a chunk of the creatures or a chunk of the adversaries are kind of locked geographically in the kingdoms because they were designed specifically for specific kingdoms, and each of the kingdoms has its own geography and its own kind of like ecology and its own environments and climates and things. And then there's a chunk of them that can kind of appear anywhere ish. A lot of them have some sort of guidance as to where they appear. For an example, sirens. You're not going to meet a siren in the middle of a field,
right,
most likely. You're going to find them in rivers or on the coast
right,
because that's where they exist. But they are not choosy about which rivers and coasts they're in.
right.
Um, as
Have
opposed to
water will
like,
travel. Yeah,
yes. So there's a lot of that, and then there's some others that can just kind of be anywhere because of what they are. And it kind of varies wildly depending on the thing. We tried to make sure that there were things that could be interestingly put into basically anywhere you went in the kingdoms, and that there was also like a good variety to kind of flavor the places up as well, so they do feel different to one another. Um,
and
because obviously, with 13 kingdoms, you want them to all feel kind of like distinct.
right, right. Um, and correct me if I'm wrong or misunderstanding it. I'm under the impression that there is an element of the game, like you had mentioned, the sort of commander dominion kind of vibe to it. I know that the armies are a thing. Isn't there also like a strongholds kind of element where like you're building kind of a base or like a dungeon?
Yes. So
Um,
I believe it's intertwined with the kind of army gameplay. There's the bit where you manage your army and you manage your stronghold are the same sort of like phase of the game. Um, I am not super up to date on how that bit works, but I am under the impression that you're talking to Chris, who wrote it next week.
that,
So there's a plug for a stream next week
yeah,
if you want to know like the ins and outs of that bit of the game.
that does
Um,
remind me too. Bit of scheduling business I did forget to mention at the top of the show. We did have an actual play scheduled for tomorrow. It unfortunately had to be rescheduled. I'll have new information on that. But instead of that actual play, I'll actually be speaking with Matthew Dawkins tomorrow at, I believe, 4 p.m. Eastern. So we're collecting questions over at the Onyx Path Discord, as well as Matthew Dawkins' Discord for that Q&A. So if you have questions for that, leave them over there in the Discord and the Monster Kingdoms channels. Thank you for bringing that up because I completely spaced about that being a thing.
no
Um,
worries.
but yeah, so I guess then my experience as a designer and as and writer has been is in terms of the Earthbane cycle has been much more aligned with the world below. Um, so was there, and in the world below, there's not that sort of army element is not factor in it, which is not to say that you couldn't grab the rules from Monster Kingdoms and do something with that. I'm sure that there's a way
Yeah.
to do so. But I guess, was there a guidance on how that should influence your bestiary design, or were you told focus on making sure these creatures are cool? We'll sort that out, in that side. Was there any sort of
It was very much the latter,
yeah,
which was mostly because we were all working on it at the same time.
uh,
So as we were working on the bestiary, Chris was writing, as far as I'm aware, from scratch, all of the army and stronghold gameplay bits. So it was very much a kind of bouncing off each other, but also with a kind of acknowledgement that what we did for the bestiary wasn't going to have a massive impact on the way Chris ended up writing the stronghold stuff. The crossover is much more lore and flavor
Sure.
than it is rules wise. There was some conversations about uh, how magic works for militaries and how different magics potentially work across the thing. And there were some conversations to be had about specifically the Brando military and the other kind of like actual formal militaries that exist in the game. But for the most part, in terms of rules wise, the as I understand it, as of last reading, the stronghold and the army stuff is quite abstracted, in a way that's kind of a step beyond the adversaries
Right.
to facilitate it working most effectively. So the kind of the granular kind of this is what a single guy in the Brando military wields and how he fights doesn't really impact how 100 of them as a block fight.
Right. And
The yeah, the
it,
flavor kind of carries through in that like Brando has these hardcore, well-trained, sort of solid blocks that fight in formation and things, and that's not a thing that all the kingdoms have and stuff. But in terms of the actual mechanics, the level of scale is such that the mechanics don't actually clash much.
right.
Um,
It's I know that the Storypath Ultra core book has has a mass combat system in it,
mm,
which is very much that that sort of a vibe where it takes everything and kind of abstracts it, and you can pull reference out of a monster and say, okay, well, we're going to apply this ability across across this unit because they're all basilisk, so they can all do X.
yeah,
But it sounds like Monster Kingdoms is way more in depth in terms of, and which not to say complicated necessarily, but just offers a lot more options and more thought out toward that um, specific, I guess, for lack of a better term, medieval or fantasy clashing
yeah,
vibe. Whereas like the Storypath Ultra rules are deliberately meant to be like this could be uh, battlefield with sticks. This could be a space battle. You know, there's
yes.
no.
Yeah,
So
so yeah, it's a lot more kind of it's got a lot more flavor baked into how it works in the Monster Kingdoms because it is talking about specific groups and how they fight with specific kind of like lore existences and histories and things in a way that, like as you say, you can't do if you need a block of units to both potentially be a bunch of spaceships or dudes with sticks, as you say.
right.
Yeah. Um,
Unless you want to just design it to have very one-sided fights.
yes.
So I guess in that process, then was there a specific adversary or group of adversaries um, that you really found joy in creating? I know we're not supposed to have favorite kids and whatnot, but were
Oh,
there
but we
some
always
things?
do. Um,
Exactly.
so I will give you two because I have a definite favorite of the ones that were kind of I took the lead on writing, but I think it will only be fair to also mention one that Steph took the lead on writing. Um, so my favorite is my trolls. I love my trolls. I've always loved trolls, but I am very fond of my Monster Kingdom trolls for a bunch of reasons. They are fairly inspired by Scandinavian folklore.
All right.
They are the kind of they are quite canny. They're quite cunning. They are often written off as stupid. They have communities and family groups and care for each other fairly quite a lot, which is a little bit unusual in the Monster Kingdoms. and is possibly one of the reasons why you don't see them in many of the societies there. Um,
Right.
they they turn partly to stone in the sunlight, so they are a modal enemy that has a essentially a fast mode and a nasty tanky mode.
Gotcha. Right.
And this is why they tend to hide under bridges, because under a bridge, they can sit and wait, and then they can ambush while being quick. And then if an extended fight happens, they're tankier and more protected for the brawl.
Oh, that's awesome.
Um, that's kind of how they operate a lot of the time. As a result, they also are often in the employ of landowners to incentivize tolls being paid for bridges.
Sure.
Um, and there's two subversions of them. There's river trolls, which are mostly the same as trolls, but they have lips and noses that can clamp shut and be airtight, and much longer tusks that are also hollow, so they can
Oh,
sit underneath the water with the straws out the top.
so they're
Um,
built-in snorkels.
yes, which is a design I've had in my head for years and have never had the chance to use, so I was very happy to get the chance to use it for this. Um, and there's a couple of reasons why river trolls are considered nastier. One is that you can't predict them being under bridges. They can be basically anywhere there's an amount of water that's fairly deep.
Right.
And also, there is another monster in the list that I will not go into, but it involves lichen, and it's very nasty, and you can't tell if the river trolls are infected by it
Oh, okay.
because they're
Gotcha.
always like licheny. So they're very dangerous for that reason. Um, And then the other variant is gargoyles, which are trolls who are super sensitive to the light, so they don't have the fast version. They're always stony.
Okay.
And as a result, they've got stunted growth, but they also have these growths that tend to form on their shoulders. And the size of the growths is considered a mark of prestige in gargoyle communities. So they tend to put themselves as high as possible to catch as much light during as much of the day as possible. And that's why you find them on castle parapets and things.
Oh, so the light like causes the growths to.
Yeah, because
Okay,
they are always kind of stony. Them being in the light builds these kind of growths up on their
that's
back, and
awesome.
they see them as a sort of like mark of power and prestige. Um, and I like them because they're an interesting fighty enemy because they've got the dual modal thing, and that interacts with player characters in some really interesting ways because you can use it. You can draw a troll into the shade to make them squishier, or you can pull them into the light to make them slower if that helps you. You can also use light magic to activate their stoniness if you're like fighting them in a dungeon and you really don't want them being fast. So there's a lot of like interplay with that thing that I think makes them an interesting enemy in a sort of in an actual fight. But also they're one of the monsters in the list. They're far from the only one, but they're one of the monsters in the list that also has a fairly social existence, so you can combat them without punching them, basically.
Right.
Like there are some monsters in that list that there is very little you can do to stop them trying to bite your head off.
Right. But you can
Trolls are
converse.
not one of those.
Right. One of my not to skew too far on a tangent, but one of my favorite representations of trolls in any media really are the way they're presented in the Witcher games.
Yes,
Because
I
you
love
you
Witcher
really don't
trolls.
have to fight them like ever. You can almost always find a non-violent solution when you're dealing with the Witcher trolls, and I love that. But it sounds like this has an element similar to that, but also with adding on of the more the Witcher trolls aren't the sharpest spoons in the shed.
No,
So
they are both from very similar mythological traditions.
sure.
Obviously, the Witch is a little bit further east, and ours is a little bit further north. But yeah, like there's that, and I love the Witcher trolls. They're fantastic. Um, but yeah, so the other monster that I will highlight that Steph took the lead on, she wrote some absolutely amazing ones. In particular, she's got an MA in classics, so a lot of her monsters are playing on like ancient Greek
Okay.
monsters. Part of our brief was familiar but new. So there was a lot of kind of like monsters that you would expect or want to see in a list like this, but with new, generally horrific twists on them in some manner. Um, And a lot of the ones that she's built up from those myths are like original, like original versions of them before the pop culture happened,
Okay.
with like some twists. So there's a lot of like, oh, this feels familiar, but also like you might not actually know that version of them if you're not
Right.
a mythology buff. Um, but they're also just not, they're not just those. But she did some very fun things with those. But probably one of my favorites that she wrote is the Relic Automagica,
Okay.
which are, so they are sort of brass copper constructs that exist in the Kingdom of Dis. And the Kingdom of Dis is the dead kingdom where everyone's a wraith. But they were very advanced before the plague that wiped them all out. And so in this kingdom, there's now these automata that sit dormant all over the place. They're just like in the halls of Dis, and they all have an activation kind of trigger. But generally speaking, nobody knows what any of them are. So there's like this really fun kind of, there are these sort of like combat murder robots, but nobody knows how to turn them on. And some of the wraiths have figured out the ones that are in their halls and things and might use them, but there's a lot that nobody has like a record of what how to sort of activate them, and it can be all sorts of different things. And it's like part of their rules is when you have one, it has to have an activation thing, but it
Right.
can be certain species of creature turning up in the vicinity. It can be certain types of magic cast in the vicinity. It can be certain words said near them. There's all sorts of different things they could be, but I just think they're very fun and evocative. And I'm also a sucker for like a ancient copper robot.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and I the thing that immediately sort of lights me up about that is I love um, impending threat that you can't know, that you can't identify, right? Like I
yeah,
know something could go very wrong here, and I have no idea how or why, you know, or what for that matter, because I don't know what this
yes,
thing can do when it does turn on. So that's very cool. I like that idea a lot. Um, and I know the it's always refreshing to hear about, you know, diving into sort of the antiquity and the classics and such for monster inspiration, because again, so many of those things are have a basis that has been obscured by pop culture to the point that
yeah,
they're effectively an unfamiliar creature. um,
yes,
you know, and then you can even go even further. I do a lot of work on scarred lands, um, and a lot of the creatures in scarred lands and the divinity. There's very much, you know, Greek inspiration rolling around in there, and so it's a very fun space to design and to develop in.
yes.
So we talked about your favorites. Was there a antagonist that you found particularly vexing that you had to wrestle with to get him over the finish line? One that took some work to get them into the shape that you wanted them.
Hmm. So, good question. Most of the ones that we struggled most with were the generally they were the ones that had like a massive lore presence.
Okay.
So I think one of the ones that we struggled with in what I would think was what I hope is an interesting way was dragons.
Okay.
Um, because we kind of knew dragons needed to be in the list. It was kind of, they might have even been specifically named in the brief, but like they're central to the lore of the Monster Kingdoms. One of the kingdoms is the Dragon Kingdom, and dragons run that kingdom. And the threat of dragons is a very present, like in particular political kind of existence. Starting a war with the Kingdom of Scales is an incredibly bad idea because dragons generally are docile and apathetic and don't bother doing anything in the Monster Kingdoms.
Right.
But riling them up is a bad idea because they will just murk you.
Right.
Like they're horribly powerful is and certain kingdoms have some ways to potentially combat them in an open war, but no one really wants to try it. So they cast a shadow over the monster kingdoms in a very kind of like definitive metaphorical sense, and we kind of knew that we had to do that, but also we're writing this bestiary at the same time that a lot of other stuff's being written as well. So we were wary of writing things that might not match up with what else gets put in, and we didn't want to spend a huge amount of kind of energy building something that just then didn't fit with something that someone else had written. And we kind of were working under the pretense that if we wrote something for dragons as the people writing the bestiary, it's probably secondary to what the people writing the kind of lore Bible write, or the people writing the character creation. You can't play a dragon, but you can play a dragonkin.
Right.
To be clear, you cannot play a dragon at the moment. But so our initial response to that was to kind of not make dragons in the bestiary and instead make like pseudo dragons.
Okay.
So things that were filling the role of dragons mechanically and kind of like as a presence thing, but weren't dragons.
Okay.
And we made a couple. They are still in the list. But then it was kind of we sort of took this to the team and we said that this was our approach, and they were like, okay, those are nice ideas, but we want the dragons though. You need to have the dragons in the list. Like, okay. So we ended up writing the dragons in the end. And really, to be honest, one of the big lessons from it is we needed to be more confident about our own writing and about our own place on the team. Like we were brought in for a reason. This was the first time me and Steph had worked with Onyx Path and had worked with a team in this manner as well. So it was a bit of a learning curve for us in terms of how to write in these
Sure.
environments, because
Sure.
it's a very different ordeal to working with one other person on a game you're both just kind of building
Right, who
from
may
scratch
be in
and
the
doing most
very
of.
room that you're in. It's very
Yeah,
different. Hey, what do you think about, as
yeah.
opposed
And when everything kind of the buck stops at you, it's a very different process to when you have to kind of like
100%.
go to other people and they're on the same level, but that you've also got people above you and people above them that you don't even get to talk to, who kind of can make final calls on stuff, even though they don't usually, sort of thing. And it was really interesting and it was really fun to work in that way. But yeah, so with the dragons, the way we kind of ended up overcoming that was just to kind of like suck it up and be a bit more confident about our own writing and just kind of put it down and see how it matched up and then edit it afterwards, basically. Um, and I think we made some fun stuff with dragons. They're quite so one of the interesting challenges with the bestiary as well was the balance with the world below.
Hmm.
Because obviously, so the Monster Kingdom is actually the third game in the Earthbane cycle, I believe. It's World Below, At the Gates, and Monster Kingdoms.
Correct.
At the Gates is still in production, I believe.
Uh,
So
yeah, they're in the development stages at this point, I believe, like the post editing development. I could be wrong, so don't come at me in the chat.
that's fair.
Because they're also not my baby. I'm a little
Yeah,
bit more aware of At the Gates. I did some promo like actual plays when it was coming out. I dig the vibe. I'm very much into that whole like sort of JRPG inspired vibe that
Mm.
it's got, but I'm not plugged into it. Um,
I'm
but
not particularly familiar with it because we were essentially given the world below as our kind of primary reference point when writing Monster Kingdoms. But one of the things that we had to do was we had the bestiary for the world below,
okay.
and it was like these should be able to mesh, which meant that to an extent we couldn't write things that were already in the world below
Right, you had to.
because we didn't want to write anything that was obsolete because it
Right,
already exists.
you want.
There are a couple of things that are essentially kind of like reworded kind of transplants.
Mm,
So they've kind of got like slightly different fluff, but they're functioning the same monster just because they felt integral to the list in Monster Kingdoms.
Well, and that was the thing specifically I wanted to ask you about the dragons, because dragons are in the world below and they do play a
Mm,
pretty significant role, though it
yeah.
sounds somewhat different. Dragons in the world below, I guess, in the sense as you're talking about like them being sort of like apathetic and like whatever until you come poke them, and like I'm in my domain, as long as you don't poke me, whatever, we're fine.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the vibe for most of the dragons in the world below. But there are such unique and interesting types of dragons in the world below. I guess my question is, are there, are we going to see like amethyst dragons making their way over, or like the sapphire dragon type thing?
So, no,
Right?
in terms of what's in the book. Obviously, the whole idea is that you can actually just bring them over. They
Sure.
mechanically will work. Um, but with the things like dragons, and this also happened with the Hemexi,
Okay.
who are which are a species in an adversary in the world below, which because Matthew really likes the Hemexi, we were asked to put them in Monster Kingdoms as well. So for both the dragons and the Hemexi, because they were big enough kind of entries and they were key enough things, and also with the dragons, they have a lot of lore that's specific to the Monster Kingdoms incarnations of them. They are kind of alternate takes on the same thing,
Okay.
so they are fundamentally different. So the dragons in Monster Kingdoms have a kind of similar format. There is a dragon, and then there are several other types of dragons. They all have the wave of destruction power. There's a certain kind of synchronicity to the dire powers and the qualities that dragons have in both games. But in Monster Kingdoms, you instead have their the different variations of dragon are based on the places they inhabit, kind of. So I'm just reminding myself what they are. So you have wheeled drakes, who are the kind of like dark element dragons. You have plateau serpents, which and wheeled drakes are kind of like your Welsh dragon style, like four legs, wings on the back, six limbs, standard guys. Plateau serpents, which are much more of the kind of Eastern serpent style of dragon. And they're the kind of the lightning dragons. You have mountain worms, which are um, big icy boys who sit on mountains, and they're kind of more like wyverns. Um, and then you've got canyon hydras, which are the earth dragons, and they are hydras. So they have multiple heads and no wings. And there's a fair amount of kind of like politic about how they see each other in the monster kingdoms.
Which
There
seems
is
fitting.
also
Seems very fitting.
there's also another type of Hydra that exists in the fairy kingdom of Ion, which is another sort of subsect of the dragons as well, but isn't included in the dragon entry. They're one of the other dragons.
Sure.
Um, and then there's also the one of the big things about dragons in Monster Kingdoms is that they cannot have they can't create true progeny.
Okay.
Um, and the things that they create when they try are blanket referred to as lithverms, and they're another entry in the thing, and they're a bit more horrendous.
Gotcha.
Uh, Limbs and wings and things sticking out all over the place, and many eyes, and um, the dragons care for them, but most other people steer well clear. Um, and they're kind of horrible, partly just because of the implications of what they are and how they exist in the world and their place in reference to dragons. But yeah, so the big thing was we kind of tried to give something new, even if they're broadly the same kind of thing.
That's awesome.
Like yeah, we tried to keep them running on similar rules to like the kind of the way that they were done in the world below, um, but different. Yeah.
That's great. Just a quick note for the audience: we're at about 10 minutes to the end, so if you do have any questions, please do type them in the chat. If you type question in all caps at the beginning, it's easier for me to spot them. You can also use our chips of onyx to highlight them. And one of the uh, people in the chat just said Fomorian dragons with a question mark. So yeah, it sounds like that's kind of what the offspring of the dragons are. They're
Yeah,
in the sense of like a mishmash of body parts and horror.
yes. Well, we were brought in because of our horror credentials, so we had to put some of it in.
That's fair. I love it, and it's a I think it's a perfect um, perfect display of the core of the setting. Like it's it's a horrible place,
Yeah.
and so the creatures should be fitting to that. That's a lot of fun. I am looking forward to checking out the bestiary. I've backed, I've downloaded all my manuscripts, but I've not opened them. So I really don't. Other than to, um, we've got some videos coming out on the YouTube channel that are clips of Matthew talking about the Monster Kingdoms RPG, just to spread the word about it and to break things down. So I did have to open the glossary, so I made sure the kingdoms were spelled right in the closed captions. But other than that, I haven't had the
Some of them,
chance.
some of them are a real pain to spell.
It's definitely there were definitely ones that I would have been phonetically wrong about, for sure. But all good fun though, all good stuff. So um, you mentioned. I just want to bring it up briefly. Once again, I guess let me throw the link in the chat in case you joined late and didn't see it. Monster Kingdoms is currently crowdfunding over on BackerKit. We are working toward the Jumpstart stretch goal. So if you've not yet done so, please hit that link. Consider throwing some support. If you don't have the money to throw at support right now, spreading the word on your social media is a huge help. Um, so, in addition to your work on um, Monster Kingdoms, you mentioned that you'd done some work on some Curseborn material as well.
Yes.
I know that's probably. I don't want to ask you anything that's NDA imperiling about that, but how I guess speaking in broad terms or in whatever terms you feel you're comfortable with, um, how did you find the was that also? I guess first of all, was that also antagonist design? Was that the what you got tapped for there?
I don't think I can say what it was, but
Oh,
it was
okay,
not.
gotcha.
It wasn't in the core of
Right.
Curseborn.
Gotcha. Okay, so a in terms of I guess the approach, did you find it different, or did you find you mentioned that your world, or I'm sorry, Mouse Kingdoms being your first work with Onyx Path. Did you find the approach similar in terms of the way that the
It was
brief was
it
set
was
up and
quite
the work was
yeah, it,
executed?
it was actually quite different in a certain regard in that it was a much smaller team.
Okay.
And it was a little bit more siloed. So there was a lot more. Well, I say it was more siloed. It wasn't, but it was a much smaller team, which meant that there was a lot more kind of connection between the things being written. So we ended up in a lot more like serious kind of discussion and bouncing off each other in that one. And also the rules were already written. Like
Right.
the the it wasn't we weren't working on the core book basically. So
Right. So there's
um
already an established voice and established
yeah.
yeah. Because
Which was a very different writing, like as a purely as a writing challenge, it was very different,
right.
in a very interesting way, um, which was fun. But hopefully, I can talk more about that in the future.
Well, we will absolutely have to have you back on the channel when it is pertinent to do so. I've gotten to do a little bit of writing for Curseborn. I did. I've been working on the tasty bits we've been putting out this year. So I've done a couple of those antagonists, and it's really been um, a delight to work on in the
I
most horrific
really,
way.
I am a fan of Curseborn, having
It's
like got to know it a bit better and sort of been aware and like had the time to read through it and look through it, I really like it as a game. Um, as I say, I cut my teeth on what I guess are spiritual predecessors to Curseborn in a lot of ways.
Sure, yeah, that's
So
fair to
there
say.
is a level to which it's like coming home a little bit, but I think it's very cool. Um, it's a really cool sort of game, and I'm a really big fan of it, and I'm trying to convince people to play it because
Well, and
I do like it.
that's appreciated as well. So yeah, as soon as it's pertinent to have you come in and talk about the work on Curseborn, let's have you back on the channel. I had a really good
I'd love
time
to be back.
talking with you. So, um, in terms of, obviously we all know that we've got the Monster Kingdoms um, backer kit going on. In terms of other things that you have in the immediate future, anything else coming up or recently released that you wanted to make sure you get out in front of the world?
So currently our main thing is the LARP. That's the thing eating our time up. So if you're in the UK and you're looking for a LARP to play, come play Dreamland. It's really nice and we're very friendly to newbies. It's a fun one, I promise. It's really good. Um, there is a link to it on our website. Woohoo! But also, if you're not in the UK, I mean, fly over and play it. Come on, do it. But
Well,
that's the big one. But also, we are still in the background. We're producing certain things. Um, I am. I have a prototype for a solo co-op skirmish game that I'm working on. Um, our next mainline project, I guess, is intended to be it's called Locus Insight, and it's a solo world building prequel to our horror game.
okay.
So the idea is that you can solo play it, build out the world a bit, and then come out of playing it with a bunch of resources and pre-written kind of like scraps and pieces of lore and things that you can then basically run a campaign with.
So
Um,
almost like, well, not even almost like it's gamifying your game prep.
yeah, in a
that's
lot of ways, yes.
that's
It is a
brilliant.
thing of like obviously you can just play it on its own,
Sure,
is
yeah.
the intention as well if you like solo world building games. But yes, the idea was that if you play it, you could then take what you've got and run a game of
That's
Locus with it, which I
that's
think is a really cool idea.
that is a really cool idea. That's pretty slick. I like that.
And then we do have some things in the beginnings of the pipeline for related properties to Stacks of Goblins,
Okay.
which we are generally calling the Soggy U, which is the Stacks of Goblins expanded universe. Um,
Love the name.
and those aren't even tabletop RPGs, to be fair. One of them's a tower defense deck builder, and the other one's a RPG board game hybrid in a lay flat book.
Okay.
Um, and the card game is about defending the goblin ruler from the onslaught of the geese that want his dinner. And it's like a character-based tower defense. Kind of, you build a fort in front of the door, and the geese come in and attack it. So it's like placing cards down, and they all have different characters have different kind of decks that they build and things. And the lay flat book is about the goblins being sent by the goblin ruler to play in his favorite TV game show, which is a rip-off of Takeshi's Castle.
Okay.
So it's like all Takeshi's Castle game board games, but you're with a kind of slant towards introducing people to role playing through a sort of board game medium. Is the idea, but those are both fairly sort of early on in the development pipeline compared to Locus Insight, which is about half done.
Right on.
We're bordering on the layout phase now, so
Well, hopefully, when we have you back on the channel, you'll have a little bit more information on those as well. We'll
yeah.
get those out in the world. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a real pleasure to go over this with you, Fern. Been awesome to talk with you. Very excited about your work on Monster Kingdoms. Can't wait to see it. I would highly recommend everybody, please go back Monster Kingdoms. Tell your friends to do so. Check out Fern's website. It's located in the chat. I've shared that link. Follow her on social media. Make sure you're spreading the word, because that is where we promote things. That's where we share news about stuff. So please do get out there. Do you have any final thoughts before we hit the road, Fern? Anything else you'd like to share with the world?
Mostly just thank you so much for having me on. And like you said, go back Monster Kingdoms, check out my stuff. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast.
Thank you for being here. Always a pleasure. You're always welcome on the channel. Folks,
Thank you very much.
I will be back here tomorrow night, tomorrow afternoon. If you're tomorrow afternoon in Freedom Time Zones, if, to interview Matthew Dawkins. I can't help myself. We'll be here talking about Monster Kingdoms with Matthew Dawkins tomorrow at, I believe, 4 Eastern, 5 Eastern. It's going to be in the pre-roll. And till then, just take care of yourselves and each other. The world is a dark place. Please try to be the light in somebody's life, and we will see you again real soon. Bye, everybody.